Deinosuchus wasn't a dinosaur. It was something worse. It was the thing that ate dinosaurs for breakfast, dragged them into the water, and held them under until they stopped kicking. And for about 7 million years, it ran the coastlines of North America like a private kingdom. Start with what it actually was, because the name does a lot of misleading work. Deinosuchus, pronounced Deinosuchus, means terrible crocodile in Greek. It was a crocodilian, the same broad family that gave us alligators and modern crocodiles. But calling Deinosuchus a crocodile is like calling a school bus a tricycle. They share a shape, almost nothing else. Start with the numbers. Deinosuchus grew to about 40 feet long. That's longer than a school bus. Some of the larger specimens may have pushed 39 or 40 feet, with a skull alone over 5 feet long, just the head. A skull longer than your average kitchen counter, lined with banana-sized teeth that didn't slice. They crushed. We'll come back to those teeth in a minute, because the way they wore down tells one of the most disturbing stories in the fossil record. It weighed somewhere between 5 and 8 tons. For comparison, the largest saltwater crocodile alive today, the Indo-Pacific monster that occasionally drags water buffalo into Australian rivers, tops out at about a ton. So Deinosuchus was, conservatively, 5 times heavier than the most feared predator currently swimming, and in some specimens, 8 times heavier. It was a Ford F-150 with eyes, floating just under the surface, watching. The first fossils were found in North Carolina in the 1850s. A couple of teeth, big and strange, in a riverbank. The scientist who looked at them thought they belonged to some kind of dinosaur. That confusion would last decades. It wasn't until 1909, when a paleontologist named John Bell Hatcher and his crew dug up a partial skull in Texas, that anyone realized what they were dealing with. The skull was crocodilian, but the size was wrong. Everything was wrong. It was bigger than any crocodile had any business being. For most of the 20th century, Deinosuchus was a footnote, a weird, oversized croc from the late Cretaceous, lumped in with curiosities. Then, in the 1990s and 2000s, paleontologists started actually examining the bite patterns on hadrosaur fossils from the same era and the same formations, and the story changed completely. Hadrosaurs were the duck-billed dinosaurs. They were the deer of their world. Common, peaceful, traveling in herds, weighing in at 3 to 4 tons fully grown. Big animals, adult hadrosaurs were not what most predators went after, and yet, on hadrosaur tailbones from Texas and Montana and Mexico, paleontologists kept finding bite marks. Deep ones, crushing fractures, healed over in some cases, which meant the dinosaur had survived the attack. The spacing of the teeth marks didn't match T-Rex. It didn't match any of the local theropods, the 2-legged carnivorous dinosaurs of the region. It matched Deinosuchus, which is when the picture clicked into place. Deinosuchus wasn't a fish eater. It wasn't picking off the occasional small dinosaur on the riverbank. It was actively hunting adult duck-billed dinosaurs, 3-ton animals, pulling them into the water, drowning them, eating them. That's the part worth slowing down for. In the late Cretaceous, about 80 million years ago, North America was split in half by a massive shallow sea called the Western Interior Seaway. It ran from the Gulf of Mexico up through what is now Texas, Kansas, the Dakotas, and into Canada. The coastlines of that seaway, the swamps and estuaries and slow-moving rivers that fed into it, were Deinosuchus territory. And along those coastlines, herds of hadrosaurs and other dinosaurs came down to drink. They didn't all make it back. Imagine you're a young Edmontosaurus, a duck-billed dinosaur the size of a moving truck. You weigh 4 tons. You're with the herd. The water's edge is clear. The sun is dropping. You lower your head to drink, and the surface of the water doesn't move. The thing underneath it doesn't breathe. It doesn't blink. It's been there for an hour, maybe 2, waiting. You have no idea how big it is. You couldn't, because almost nothing is visible above the waterline. 2 eyes, maybe a section of armored back. The rest is geometry hidden in dark water. You lean down. The water explodes. A modern saltwater crocodile attacks with a bite force of about 3,700 pounds. Deinosuchus, based on jaw mechanics and tooth-wear modeling, is estimated to have bitten down with somewhere between 18,000 and 23,000 pounds of force. That's not in the ballpark of T-Rex. That exceeds T-Rex by a lot. We're talking about a bite that could fold a hadrosaur's leg bone like a wet stick, and a skull built to anchor the muscles that delivered it. To put that bite into something physical, picture a hydraulic press the size of a small car closing on bone. Now picture that press attached to a 40-foot body, submerged, invisible, with reflexes that can close those jaws in under 1/10 of a second. The hadrosaur on the riverbank would not feel the strike before it happened. The first sensation would be the pressure, the noise of its own bones giving way, the world tipping sideways as the water came up to meet it. Then comes the death roll. Modern crocodilians grab prey and spin, twisting their massive bodies to tear chunks off or to disorient and drown the victim. Now scale that up to 8 tons. A roll from something that large, in shallow water, with a hadrosaur clamped in its jaws, would have been the equivalent of being hit by a truck and dragged at the same time. The hadrosaur wouldn't have been able to stand. Its lungs would fill. Its neck would twist. The herd, just feet away on the shore, would scatter without understanding what had just happened. By the time the water settled, the only thing left would be a slick on the surface and a slow swirl of mud. Now back to those teeth, because they're one of the strangest pieces of physical evidence in any prehistoric predator. Deinosuchus teeth are not slicing teeth. They're not the dagger-like serrated knives that T-Rex used. They're round and blunt and built for crushing. Some of the teeth in the back of the jaw are almost flat, bone-crushing teeth, and the wear patterns show that these animals were grinding down through their prey, including through bone. Tooth fragments have been found embedded in turtle shells. Deinosuchus seems to have routinely eaten turtles, swallowing them whole or crushing them outright. There were giant turtles in the Western Interior Seaway. Some of them weighed hundreds of pounds. Deinosuchus ate them like popcorn, which raises a question that paleontologists are still chewing on. How did anything this large evolve in the first place? And what kept it from getting even larger? The leading theory has to do with the environment of the Western Interior Seaway itself. Warm, shallow, biologically rich, with massive seasonal migrations of large prey moving through the coastlines. It was, ecologically, the perfect conditions for a crocodilian to scale up without limit. There was simply more food than a normal-sized predator could eat. Evolution rewarded the bigger ones, the ones with longer jaws, with more bite force, with the strength to take on larger and larger prey. Generation after generation, Deinosuchus crept up the size chart until it was no longer competing with anything. It was the apex of its ecosystem, the thing that everything else was afraid of. The Cretaceous gets darker from there. In the same swamps and rivers where Deinosuchus hunted, there were also large theropods, carnivorous dinosaurs, the local Texas tyrannosaurs, the various carnotaurines further south. And we have bite-marked theropod bones too. Theropods bitten by Deinosuchus. Yes, that's the sentence. The terrible crocodile was hunting other predators, not just plant-eating dinosaurs. Meat-eaters, other apex predators of the region were on the menu. There is a fossil from Big Bend National Park in Texas that shows tooth marks on the tail vertebrae of a theropod, and the spacing fits Deinosuchus. We don't know if the dinosaur was killed by Deinosuchus or scavenged by it. Either way, the picture is the same. Even the dinosaurs that hunted other dinosaurs had to think twice about going near the water. That changes the shape of the food chain. T-Rex lived later, mostly in the northern part of the continent, but its earlier cousins shared the Cretaceous floodplains with Deinosuchus. These were tyrannosaurs in the 30-foot range, animals that everything else in the ecosystem feared. And they had a predator. They had something that occasionally pulled them under, drowned them, and ate them. The Cretaceous food chain didn't end at the dinosaurs. It went one level higher, into the water, where the rules changed entirely. The Big Bend fossils, by the way, are where some of the largest Deinosuchus specimens have been found. Texas had two things in abundance in the late Cretaceous: coastal swamps and giant prey. Deinosuchus dominated that landscape for millions of years. And then, somewhere around 73 to 75 million years ago, it disappeared. The species died out before the asteroid hit, before the rest of the dinosaurs went. The honest answer is we're not sure. The leading theory ties it to changes in the Western Interior Seaway itself. As the late Cretaceous wore on, the sea began to retreat. The coastlines that had supported Deinosuchus shrank. The seasonal migrations of hadrosaurs and other large prey thinned out. Without that constant supply of huge food items, an 8-ton crocodilian becomes a luxury the ecosystem can't afford to maintain. Smaller crocodilians can survive on smaller prey. A 40-foot apex predator cannot. It needs whole dinosaurs to keep functioning. When the dinosaurs stopped coming to the water, Deinosuchus starved out of existence. There's something almost ironic about that. The most terrifying predator in its ecosystem, the thing nothing else could touch, died of hunger because its environment changed. Not killed by a rival, not killed by climate disaster, just slowly outgrown by a world that no longer had room for something its size. One more piece of the puzzle that paleontologists have been working on for the last decade. Growth rings, crocodilian bones, like tree rings, record annual growth. By cutting cross-sections of Deinosuchus bones and counting the rings, researchers have estimated how long these animals lived. The answer is unsettling. A fully grown Deinosuchus probably lived to be 50 years old. Some may have pushed past 70. They grew slowly. They reached full size around 35 years of age, which means every adult Deinosuchus in any given swamp had been hunting in that same stretch of water for decades. They knew every bend, every shallow, every place a hadrosaur was likely to come down to drink. They learned, they remembered, and they outlived almost everything else around them. A hadrosaur lived maybe 20 years if it was lucky. A theropod, probably less. The crocodile in the water was older than the dinosaur on the shore, often by a generation. That's a kind of advantage that's almost unfair. Imagine a predator that has had 40 years to memorize your territory before you were even born. The closest living relatives of Deinosuchus, in case you're wondering whether we should be losing sleep over modern descendants, are alligators. Not crocodiles, despite the name. Alligators, the same lineage that produced the American alligator you can see in any Florida swamp today. Stand at the edge of the Everglades on a hot afternoon. Watch one of those 12-foot alligators drift just below the surface with only its eyes showing, and try to imagine that same shape stretched to 40 feet. Same patience, same eyes, same waiting, just bigger. Much bigger, big enough to take you and your car at the same time. That image, that mental scale-up, is the closest thing we have to a real picture of what cruising the swamps of late Cretaceous Texas would have looked like. And it's the answer to why Deinosuchus deserves a place at the top of any list of the most terrifying animals that ever lived on this planet. Not because it was the biggest predator ever. T-Rex was bigger by length. Argentinosaurus was bigger by mass, not because it had the strongest bite. Some marine reptiles probably hit harder. Not because it was the smartest or the fastest or the most specialized, but because of where it hunted and what it hunted and how. A predator that ambushes from cover is more frightening than one that charges. A predator that lives in water where you can't see it is more frightening than one that lives on land where you can. A predator that doesn't need to chase you because it knows you'll come to the water eventually is the most frightening of all. Deinosuchus was all three. It didn't have to chase prey. It just had to wait at the only place every animal in the region had to visit. And for 7 million years, that strategy worked so well that nothing else in the ecosystem could push back. There's a specific kind of horror to ambush predation that ground-based predators don't quite reach. T-Rex, for all its size, has to commit to an attack. You can see it coming. You can know your fate. The hadrosaur drinking from the river had no such warning. It went down to the water like it had 1,000 times before. And one day, the water answered. Paleontologists have a term for the kind of ecosystem dominance Deinosuchus had. They call it a keystone predator. A species so central to its environment that its presence shapes the behavior of everything around it. Hadrosaurs that lived in Deinosuchus territory likely drank in shifts, posted lookouts, avoided certain stretches of water that the older animals had learned to fear. We see this behavior in modern African herds responding to crocodiles at watering holes. Scale that up. Add 7 million years of evolution. The dinosaurs of late Cretaceous Texas and Mexico would have been afraid of the water in ways their ancestors were not. And the strangest part of this story is that almost no one outside of paleontology knows about it. Deinosuchus doesn't show up in the movies. It doesn't have a Jurassic Park scene. There's no animatronic version at the museum gift shop. Most people, if they imagine the late Cretaceous, picture a landscape ruled by T-Rex and dotted with herds of grazing duckbills. They don't picture the rivers. They don't picture the things floating in the rivers. They don't picture the slow, patient armored geometry of a 40-foot crocodilian waiting for dinner to come to it. But the rivers were there, and so was Deinosuchus. And for 7 million years, the most terrifying creature in North America wasn't standing on the floodplain showing off its teeth. It was lying still, eyes just above the waterline, in water that looked completely empty. A few years ago, a research team led by Adam Cossette published a major reassessment of Deinosuchus that consolidated decades of fragmentary findings. The paper described the animal as having a skull unlike anything else in the crocodilian family, with a bulbous snout, massive bone-crushing jaws, and proportions that suggested it could take prey vastly larger than itself. The conclusion of the paper, in academic terms, was that Deinosuchus was not just an oversized crocodile, but a unique evolutionary experiment. In plainer terms, the conclusion was that the late Cretaceous produced a predator that has no living equivalent, and probably no equivalent in any other period of Earth's history. There was nothing else like it. There has been nothing else like it since. If you want to get a sense of the scale, the Smithsonian and a few other natural history museums now display reconstructed Deinosuchus skulls next to modern crocodile skulls for comparison. The Smithsonian specimen is positioned at eye level with the average adult viewer. You stand in front of it and you're looking into a mouth that could close around your entire torso with room to spare. Most visitors do a double take. They look at the placard. They look back at the skull. They walk away unsettled. That reaction, multiplied across an entire ecosystem of dinosaurs trying to get a drink of water, is the everyday experience of being prey in late Cretaceous North America. Hold on to this idea. The dinosaurs were not the only kings of their world. There were other kings. The water had its own, and the water's king was patient, armored, and bigger than anything in the same ecosystem had any business being. While T-Rex prowled the floodplains, Deinosuchus ran the rivers. The land had its tyrant. The water had its terror. Both were the apex predators of late Cretaceous North America. The difference is that one of them had to chase. The other just waited. Every time you see an alligator on a Florida golf course, every time you watch a documentary clip of a Nile crocodile dragging a zebra under the surface, you are looking at a faint, scaled-down echo of what once stalked these continents. The lineage is the same, the strategy is the same, the patience is the same. Only the size has changed. And if the conditions ever come back, the warm, shallow seas, the migrating megafauna, the rich coastal swamps stretching across half a continent, evolution will likely build something like Deinosuchus again. It's a winning design. It worked too well to forget. The terrible crocodile is gone. The blueprint isn't. And that's it for this video. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.